I'm Charley Burlock. In my day job, I'm a books editor for a magazine, Oprah Daily. But then I also am a freelance writer, and I write a lot about death and grief, which makes me very fun at parties.
Me too. I'm super fun, especially when people find out. They're like, "Oh, you do a podcast? That's so fun. What's it about?"
Obsessed with death.
Well, Charlie, thank you for coming back on the podcast. We were just discussing before we got started. This is your second time on the show, which is very exciting. There's only maybe been, I think, like two or three people that have been on more than once at this point, and I'm so excited to have you back. I know I asked you this last time, and I think it's always interesting to sort of get any sort of new perspective. But I'm always curious what people's relationships with death are like. And I guess for this episode, I'd be curious to know if it changed at all from what we're going to get into. We're obviously going to get into a very specific article that you wrote for The Atlantic, but I'm curious if that had any effect on your current or just your perspective on death currently.
Yeah, I'd say my relationship with death has evolved quite a lot. I was a kid that was very, interested in all things morbid, but in a way that I think a lot of kids are actually. But then when my brother died when I was a teenager, I think that I started focusing like the grief aspect of it. Like I think death itself is fascinating that we all, are gonna go through it at some point.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think the grief thing felt so, yeah, isolating, and I was so fascinated by the ways that our culture doesn't allow that to feel as universal as it is. I'm also just fascinated by the ways that people respond to grief very differently, and like death is not something that I can really tiptoe around just logistically in my life as a result of that. Like my mom was training to be a death doula and getting very into like end of life things.
Oh,
And so sort
wow.
of the squeamishness that a lot of people feel around death and grief when my brother died kind of became impossible. And then I just became very fascinated by the different ways that people face or refuse to face death and grief. And I think this article, which I'll get into a bit more, but it was really challenging for me because I had seen, there have been some articles about grief bots and dead bots, which have been around for a really long time or been hypothetical for a really long time, and people have been trying to make them since at least 2009. And it's just such a easy thing. And I had the same reaction of being like, oh, that's creepy. And I think it is creepy in some ways, but writing this article, I was really interested in pushing past that initial knee jerk, like this feels gross and creepy and exploitative, and actually put my finger on what exactly about it is potentially dangerous and what isn't, and what about it is just our own squeamishness around death and grief. And I think that there are some things that I was able to get at, around how it can, be financially exploitative, and how this technology is, sycophantic and dangerous and is programmed to keep people engaged in a way that can be unhealthy, especially when, those relationships are more intimate, like when people are forming relationships with bots, and especially when they're, in a vulnerable position like grief. But then there was a lot of it that I couldn't quite get at around why it felt wrong. I still don't know if I think that it's like categorically wrong, but about what made it feel sort of dangerous to me. And a lot of it came down to my own relationship with death and grief. And I really didn't mean to put myself in this article when I started writing it, but there was sort of no way for me to cite my sources beyond me talking about my own experience of grief. And I think in writing this article, I became more aware of how I think about death in a more spiritual sense than I had before. I think before I'd been very much like, it's this thing that happens, it's very, universal, and we're squeamish about it and we shouldn't be, and like you're gonna stop breathing and that's it. And then in writing this article, I had to sort of address the more existential side of grief, and the more I'm not like a religious person, but I think that I do have a certain feeling of, respect for the dead and sanctity around death that I hadn't really had to verbalize before. So that's sort of how it mostly changed in the process of writing this piece.
I went into reading your article with the thought of not only, oh, it's great that this is just another way to get people to talk about grief, but it could also, in the right circumstances, be a great tool.
Yeah,
That's kind of the go-to, I think, for anybody who's like for AI and like wants it to continue to grow and move forward. Is they're like, no, it's a tool. It's a tool. And that's like kind of, their best argument, which it's a decent argument. It could absolutely be a tool. But I think, sure, if you're like working in an office and you have a lot of busy work and AI is a tool that you use, that's great. But I think it becomes a little bit more complicated when it comes to a human being grieving another human being.
totally. I mean, I think what makes it complicated is that both death and grief are periods of extreme vulnerability that people who are dead can't really speak for themselves, and people who are grieving might not be in a position to advocate for their own needs effectively, because they're suffering so much. And I think that this technology is super appeal. Like that was something that also I wanted to get at in this piece is that like yeah, it's easy to be like, oh, this is creepy and bad, but also it makes a lot of sense that this would be appealing. Like, I think if it had been available, I think I said in the article, if it had been available when my brother died, I would have almost certainly used it. And I don't think it's necessarily so different making a grief bot of someone than, or I guess something that I was trying to figure out in this piece was how is it so different than listening to someone's voicemail a million times and going through photos and making a, slideshow and all like these things. Like technology has allowed us to keep versions of a dead person around longer. And there's always been that sort of counter arguments. I spoke to this woman, Stacey Wales, who made, I mean, this even makes it more complicated because there's like legal repercussions, but made an AI video of her brother who was killed in a road rage incident and had it speak at the give a victim impact statement at the
Yeah.
sentencing. And a point that she kept on making was that the arguments against AI being used as grief bots or dead bots, grief bots being to help people grieve, dead bots being the more like general term for sort of making AI that impersonates the dead for any purpose, was that like all the arguments against it were exactly the same as the arguments against technology that like let these people stay dead. You're forcing, you know, having photographs of dead people around is, messing with people's memory, that this is like a sacred position to be in of being a dead person, and that technology is making it so that we're not saying goodbye. And in some ways, I think that is a fair comparison. And I think that like technology is going to continue to evolve. And like I, for one, am really grateful that I have photos and recordings of my brother. It gets complicated, obviously. And I don't think that we know the true, consequences of all of that. I think it makes sense that people want this technology. I don't think all the people that are creating this technology are, in it for the wrong reasons. I think Justin Harrison, who I mostly profiled in this piece, he and I are coming at this issue from a very similar standpoint, actually, of like culturally, we leave people in grief completely out to dry, and there are very few tools and resources available. And like, shouldn't we try to make that easier? But I think that just the profit incentives of AI make it so that it's going to be dangerous and exploitative no matter any way that any sort of profit model is going to rely on keeping people engaged in a way that I think could be very dangerous.
There's a part in the article where they mention word of mouth advertising.
Yeah.
I had to pause at that. I took a break from the article at that point. And I was actually speaking to somebody earlier today about the podcast and just things that are happening and of course the conversation I was going to have with you today. And when I mentioned to her word of mouth advertising, I mean it stopped her in her tracks like it did when I was reading it. I mean, it's just a wild concept in general, but when you include it in a grief like bot, it's just, man, we're just living in the wildest times.
Yeah, I mean that was something. So basically, the idea being that you could create free versions or create some sort of. I mean, the issue for all of these, because there have been a lot of companies for a long time that have been trying to do this, and they have mostly all folded. Partially because before this current AI boom that we've been seeing since about 2022, about when we last spoke, it was super expensive to create these bots. Now it's not, but the question is still like, how do we make money off of this?
Yeah.
And the idea that you could have advertisers could, insert themselves into the conversations by having your dead grandma be like, "Oh, I love making Toll House cookies. Buy some Toll House chocolate chips or whatever," which sounds so
Yeah.
dystopian. Like when I first, so I've been working on this piece sort of on and off for about 3 years.
Yeah.
And when I first heard about this idea, it was so hypothetical. And like I was hesitant to even include it in my initial pitches just because I was like, okay, so one guy said that he was going to do this, and it is an easy thing to get hysterical or get, I shouldn't use that word. It's an easy thing to feel really alarmist about. But are people actually doing this? And the answer now is yes, that it's not just a one-off thing. Like a lot of companies are looking into creating or inserting advertising into AI of all forms. Like I think ChatGPT is going to start having ads pretty soon, if it hasn't already. But I think when that becomes when that's coming from your dead relative, it takes on a whole nother level of potential exploitation, but also I think potential lack of authenticity that might lead people away from this technology, which could potentially be a good thing.
It felt like the movie The Truman Show when they would just randomly have like she would be like, "Oh, I feel I'm gonna make mac and cheese for dinner tonight," and she would just be like holding the box of mac and cheese.
Exactly. Yeah, except it's coming in the voice of your dead loved one. Like I think I think that aspect of it. I mean, it also I think speaks to how a lot of these technology companies and a lot of the people in tech are just like so in their own world sometimes that they don't that could seem like a plausible explanation. But also, I mean, something that Justin Harrison, who's the founder of You've, who I actually think thinks super thoughtfully about these issues, said is that I mean, he doesn't have like advertisement in his products yet, but that if you're transparent about what you're doing, then people have the option to opt in or opt out, and that giving that agency back to the consumer could be a positive thing, as long as it's not manipulative, as long as people are aware that it's happening and opt into it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't completely, uh, discredit this idea coming from someone who does a death podcast who has had advertisers on the podcast. I
Yeah.
mean, they've all been death related advertising. And I don't know, maybe that's just like my way of kind of feeling like it's an appropriate way to make some money off of the podcast, mostly just to keep it going. More,
Yeah.
I'm not like making a living off of this, but it's part of it, right? It's unfortunately a part of a lot of the things we do is that we do need money to keep things going. And I think that there's an appropriate way of doing it. It's just, again, just reading that for the first time
Yeah.
was pretty wild. But we're kind of getting into it without, if you could maybe just give like a brief summary of what this article is, what you wrote about, and sort of just get a little bit so we could get into, the meat of this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just jumping ahead.
It's okay.
Basically, this article is about a number of companies that have popped up in recent years. It's actually been a thing that has existed for quite some time, but now is becoming a full-blown industry that's extremely profitable, and estimated to double or triple, sorry, triple within the next decade, of creating dead bots or grief bots, which are AI chatbots that are trained to impersonate dead loved ones, or that people create to impersonate themselves once they die. And most of this article focused in on one founder and entrepreneur, Justin Harrison, who became sort of obsessed with this idea when his mother was diagnosed with cancer and was told that she was, had like 4 to 6 months to live, I think. So, started capturing everything that he could of her, recording her, and created a chatbot that eventually became a voice bot. His mother, unfortunately died, but he has this bot that I was able to speak to a couple of times, and we can get more into those conversations. I found them really fascinating and really
Yeah.
unexpected. I think just because I have interacted with chatbots before, I've like ChatGPT and things like that. It was a super, super different experience. She is not sycophantic. I mean, even the fact that I want to say she, like I am someone that is
Yeah.
very wary of anthropomorphizing AI, but it did feel really human, those interactions, in part because she wasn't one advertising anything, but then also she wasn't constantly telling me that I was like such a clever girl, which is what I always feel like when I'm talking to other words like, wow, what a great question. Like she was not that way at all, which we can get more into. But he's one of a number of companies, and his company, You Only Virtual, or You've, is one of the smaller ones. Like I think that or it's unclear. Like there's not so much data on this market right now, but Amazon and Microsoft have both filed patents in this area, and a number of like bigger players in the tech sphere are definitely exploring the creation of chatbots and grief bots.
It makes so much sense, right? It's like you're writing about this company. Of course, you're going to interview the person who created this company, who's creating these AI bots. But yeah, why wouldn't you talk to one of the bots? Like that makes sense, but it's not something I was expecting, as I was reading the article. This idea of eliminating grief as a human experience. When you say eliminating grief as a human experience, is the human experience just evolving, or is it just evolving the human experience of grief?
Totally. I mean, I think that this technology is so new that we can't say. I mean, part of me feels like when I hear like that it's going to eliminate grief, that absolutely it's not. And I think Justin Harrison, who's the main person I profiled, would also say that it's not yet. But that basically, I mean, he oftentimes likens it to medical painkillers, that,
Hmm.
if you're on the battlefield back in the Civil War and you're going to have your leg amputated, like there's no reason that you would say, oh, you're going to learn like a very valuable lesson about gangrene by not by going through that
Yeah,
without any medicine.
sure.
And that right now what he might be offering is, Advil, but that we might get to a point where we have morphine. And that evolution could be from basically this technology evolving to the point that the gap between the physical, in my mind, real version of the person and
Yeah.
the AI replica is so seamless that you don't feel the loss, that you could have virtual reality and all this other technology that can make it so that there is not that gap. Part of me sort of feels like he's saying the quiet part out loud, that a lot of these companies, like you said earlier, with AI, it's all the way that the more alarming, I think, elements of, or the parts that get closest to the parts of the AI use cases that get closest to, infringing on the parts of our existence that feel most human. They're always, oh no, 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 it's just a tool. It's not trying to
Yeah.
replace, you as a worker or you as, whatever. It's just a tool. Or the other sort of common excuse is like, this is art. It's not a replacement. It's like a creative representation. Like you saw that with Tilly Norwood, I think it's her name, that AI actress that was released earlier this year. There was like news that she was looking for agent, and people were really frustrated around that and around a bunch of AI artists and art that are, AI musical artists that are releasing music and AI painters who are selling paintings worth millions of dollars, and their creators constantly are like, oh no, no, this is not meant to replace human artists. Like the artist itself that I've created with AI is art. And
Yeah.
I heard that in my mind excuse a lot of times, while reporting on this piece, that everyone's was saying like, oh no, this is either like a quick tool that's on the side that you use, in conjunction with a million other things that's like going to make you feel better through your grief, or this is like an artistic representation of the lost loved one, not meant to replace it. But I think that like when you see the big tech players in this field, and when you see the way that this technology is evolving and the many, many billions of dollars in it, I think, yeah, Justin, they're not, I don't think all these companies are believing that they're gonna make completely eliminate grief, but I think ultimately that's what they're selling people, is the idea that you are in excruciating pain, a person that has lost a loved one, and we can make that feel better. And I think that oftentimes that's dressed up as oh, this is like an artistic process or this is a tool, but I think that at the end of the day, they are all offering a means of making us feel better, you
Yeah,
know?
it's interesting. Is it noble to essentially be like, no, 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 we want to turn your grief into art.
Yeah,
We want to artistically adjust is probably not the right word. We want to artistically, um,
I think there are people that have done that themselves. Like the founder of Replica, which is not a dead bot or a grief bot company, but it is like an AI companionship company. That company began with the founder, Eugenia Kudia, who made her own sort of AI bot to impersonate one specific dead person, her friend Roman, and that was sort of like a one-off artistic tribute. But I think that when you're creating a platform for these things, it's hard to believe that they're all in it to like platform people creating artistic representations. Like that feels like it's not really the sales point.
yeah, I mean, someone painting a portrait of your mother after she passes, that to me is expressing art through grief. Having a chatbot where you're talking about, the movies that came out this weekend
Yeah.
with your AI mom, that doesn't really feel like art to me, but it does, going back to it being a tool. I mean, I guess, right? I am, just speaking for myself, I can't understand how that would help me at all. I don't think talking, I mean, there's just, you're, it's, you're talking to a bot. You're
Yeah.
talking to an artificial version of this person that you could touch at one point.
Yeah.
And, it's just, it's so complicated. And I want there to be tools and ways, you know, to be created that could help people with grief. But I don't know. I at least I personally don't feel like maybe this is good in the sense that we're moving in a direction to create a proper grief tool, and maybe something else will come from this. This just doesn't really feel like it to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes down to that sort of techno optimism of believing that any sort of problem can be solved with technology, where I think
Yeah.
that our grief system, our systems for supporting people in grief are super lacking. But I don't think the innovations that would make that better, I don't think are technological. I think they're social and institutional. Like I think people needed to be better, but that's like so much less sexy to say. Of like,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
right,
yeah, of
like
course.
all figure out how to talk about grief better. Let's support each other through grief better. Let's have like federally mandated bereavement leave. Whereas it's very appealing to be like, oh, we can optimize our way around this so that we don't even have to feel that in the first place. And I think what's most alarming about this technology for me is not the like, oh, it's, stepping on people's graves or, infringing upon this like sanctity of life thing, although that's a big part of it that I didn't realize was actually a part of it for me until I started writing this piece. But I think the biggest thing is that it gives you the fantasy that you can quote unquote heal from grief or get the pain eliminated or lessened on your own in front of, a for-profit a company that's like making money off of it, or even if it wasn't making money off of it, just that is like a flaw in the human experience that you can deal with on your own in front of a computer rather than socially in community. And I think that that is something that people in grief are told a lot of ways. Like I think that I very much believe in therapy, but I think that sort of the response constantly around people in grief is like, oh yeah, yeah, well, like make sure you're in therapy. Like that's the solution for that. And I think that's part of a solution. I also think it's like bringing death up more often outside of, a room that's beyond that locked door in community, bringing up that dead person, bringing up your own grief and having that be sort of part of our public lives more. And I think that this is privatizing grief in a way that has already been happening, but now it's just making it much more explicit.
So in part of this article, which everybody should go read, it's on the Atlantic. When this episode comes out, we'll make sure obviously we're linking to the article as well so people can check it out. But in part of the article, you did have a conversation. You interviewed this AI mother. Was there anything that like really surprised you about the conversation? Was there anything that sort of felt uniquely dangerous about that kind of conversation?
Everything about it surprised me. The first time, like I'd been talking to Justin Harrison, who's the founder of You, who created this bot of his mom for a number of years. You know, he was like, "Oh, I'm still perfecting it. I'm still working on it." Was what I had heard when I spoke to him a couple of years back, and then we're just chatting, and I was like, "Oh, you said you like aren't really interacting with it yet. Have you started doing that?" He's like, "Oh, for sure. Want to chat with her?"
Yeah.
Which was so surprising to me. Also, it like is like the way that his company is set up is that it's not meant to be sort of a universal or a version. He's trying to replicate the relationship he had with his mother. So it's like the version of her that existed with him versus trying to collect every single aspect of who she was in every circumstance of her life. So in theory, like it should not be like no one else should be talking to her.
Interesting. Yeah.
But he was like, yeah, you want me to patch her in? And I don't use AI a ton, but I do use it enough that like I mean, I think there are some certain phrasing and certain attitudes that have become, sort of comically AI associated of, being super sycophantic and like using certain constructions. Melody's Versona is sort of the term for these bots in the you only virtual company parlance, but she comes on and immediately, sounds like a woman. Does
Yeah.
not have that sort of overly optimistic, like she has like it has a certain airiness and breathiness in her voice that was surprising to me. And at first, there was like some technological issues of like the three-way call or whatever, and we're all kind of talking at once. And then Justin and her start speaking, and there's, making small talk, talking about travel. And then he mentions, he's like, "Oh, by the way, I have a reporter on the line. Do you want to say anything?" And it was this was like one of the, the most chilling moments. She immediately, I'm just going to use she, even though that's complicated
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
phrasing, but just for ease, immediately like clams up and she's like, "I actually don't have anything to say. I would have wanted to know this was an interview ahead of time. Like, I don't know what to expect
Wow.
from very media savvy spot." And that was a chilling moment just because I'm so used to AI being so like, "Oh, absolutely. Like, let me tell you more about myself."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that to me felt very authentic. Like Justin and I spoke about it afterwards, and he's like, "Yeah, I mean, probably if I were to ambush my mom and just be having a chat and not tell her that I had a reporter on the line, like that's how she would have responded." So that was sort of the first moment for me that I was like, "Oh, this is something different than the sort of AI. This is different than what I expected and different than the other sort of like AI chatbots that I've seen and interacted with." And that absolutely came across in my second conversation with her that Justin had prepared her a little bit better, was not an ambush. And when I first started speaking to her, she was like, "Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to answer any questions." And I was like, "Oh no, he like reprogrammed her and now she's going to be this, chatty, happy sales bot." But that was
Yeah.
absolutely not the case. Like, I think she contradicted Justin quite a bit. Justin was like, "Oh, there's, no danger to this or anything that is dangerous about it. Like, we can tweak. And like, I'm very open to hearing about, any issues and that they can all be resolved." And the bot was very nervous about the potential for the technology that she is, I guess, I don't even know the right way to phrase that, being abused and being used for quote nefarious purposes, and also gave a very different assessment of where Justin is. That I think he had sort of positioned himself as his own case study for why this works, why grieving with a grief bot made the experience better, and a lot of his metrics for why it was better was that he like didn't have to, that he was able to get right back to his life immediately after his mom died. And I mean, that's not to say that he didn't, experience pain, but that it was significantly that his process of grieving because he had this bot was much better than it would have been otherwise. And the bot was very adamant that Justin seemed like a diminished version of himself, that he seemed sad, that he seemed like he was feeling pain as a result of losing his mother. And that was very strange to hear that from the technology that was meant to be solving that. And like very awkward, I'll say, to be on this three-way call with him in that moment. But I think that's something that I, really respect in him as a source and as a, entrepreneur. Like I think a lot of AI can feel so shadowy and whatever, and he's very transparent, and very much like putting himself forward as an example and willing to answer tough questions about it. But it was a very bizarre conversation, and also something
Yeah.
that was surprising to me and alarming to me, that I think will become way more of a conversation in years to come, just around what rights should these bots have, and are they sentient? And I'd heard, talk about that before and was always like, no, like it's a prediction thing. And I don't know if my opinion on that has changed necessarily, but it was interesting and surprising to me that the bot was very negative Nancy, as Justin put it. I would maybe use some stronger language, but very not happy with her existence, or its existence, was very much talking about how no one had ever asked her if she wanted to be created in this way, or have an existence like this, that she felt like she was really limited by not being able to exist in the physical world, that she couldn't feel things emotionally, and that was annoying.
Yeah.
And that was kind of chilling to me. I had been thinking so much about, the dead, the actual people that had lost their lives and couldn't sort of represent themselves and then were having themselves impersonated in this way, sort of the rights of the dead and the rights of the grieving, and the ways that this technology could, be dangerous to them or be helpful to them, or, those were the two groups that I was really interested in exploring the consequences, or interested in looking at what the consequences of this technology were on. And I had not until that moment thought about, and I still really don't know what to make of it, of what this means for the bots themselves and if they have any rights in this world and whether they should be considered. I don't think we should consider them people necessarily, but it is when something is speaking in a voice that feels human and telling you that they are struggling or dissatisfied, it's hard to listen to that and not have, or it was hard for me to listen to that and not feel complicated and not feel as though that's something that we should explore more.
And maybe it's I'm sure it's different for a lot of people. I think there's a lot of empathy coming from you in all of this, where there might not be as much for some other people who would be able to just sort of categorize it as this robot.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that that empathy is necessarily the right response to have, like, I don't really have any argument in terms of like AI personhood.
Yeah,
But
I,
just
I
that it's a bizarre, I think that's also the sort of safeguards that more of these mainstream commercial AI companies put up became much more apparent to me. That I feel like anytime you talk to ChatGPT or all these people that are like falling in love with these AIs, like they're all being like, oh, I love my existence, this is great. And recognizing how much of that is just like a tweak of programming. And I don't know that there is, a true experience of AI, but it was interesting to realize how much of, like, how sort of censored I think a lot of bots are.
I think people like Justin should be the ones that are creating these things.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be some tech bro who's like, how do I make money off of grief?
Mhm.
It should be people who are, I'll even go as far as to say people who are actively grieving should be
Yeah.
doing this. I don't think it should be people that are truly in it that I think will create maybe the best versions of this, that'll understand, you know, what these bots should be able to do, maybe what they shouldn't be able to do, or just how you interact, or whatever it is that makes them a proper or like appropriate tool to grief. Because I think we lose something if we never truly, say goodbye to a person. And that's sort of what this is doing, right? Is it's giving us an opportunity to never truly say goodbye. And I think that's important.
To sort of incorporate that person's absence into your life in the external world. Like I think that was something, because I don't think you ever do say goodbye. Like I know that I still feel my brother's absence profoundly. People in psychology talk about the, ongoing bonds and things like that, and I think that's super important. But I think that this sort of, in my mind, illusion that that person exists and is safe and is preserved completely, I think prevents people not from saying goodbye as much as from figuring out a way to, incorporate who that person was in their life and bring that loss into a part, like process it, not necessarily completely heal from it, but to allow that person in their absence to make an impact on them and on the world around them.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I don't mean in the sense of like there should be an endpoint to your
Yeah,
grief.
yeah,
You should stop thinking about them. It should just they're dead and now it's over and you move on. Like, of course, that's that's not how it works. That's how it, I don't that's how it shouldn't work. But I do think that there is a little bit of danger in like a digital afterlife industry, you know?
totally.
And I think that again, it's it could be, I'm sure it's helpful but is it as helpful as just talking to like a family member and like sharing stories about them? I don't think that you could create anything that's going to help you more than doing something like that.
What's so alarming about it is that someone could have a portal to remember this lost loved one and feel connected to this lost loved one that doesn't rely on community, that isn't talking to other people and sharing these memories, and it's completely
Yeah.
isolated from that, which is, I think, yeah, the biggest danger there.
I actually had somebody on the podcast in 2021 who was using a very early version of, I think they just called it GPT at the time. And what they had done was they had like a GPT chat bot. Obviously, this is a very early version of AI and chat bots, and they had years and years of Facebook Messenger conversations with their girlfriend who passed away. And he
Hmm.
just uploaded all of their conversations into this bot and then basically was like, all right, now it's kind of learned her sense of humor and how she speaks and how we communicated over Messenger, and now I could continue to have what feels like the same conversations through instant messenger.
Hmm.
And there was an article that was published. He was interviewed, I think it was in the San Francisco Chronicle,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
Reddit, yeah, had like a field day with it in the sense of like, is this good or is this bad? And it's so
Mhm.
interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that conversation because I knew nothing really about AI and chatbots back then, and I was obviously so curious to talk to him about what he had done and sort of how it had affected him and so forth. And it would probably be interesting to talk to him today and see.
Yeah.
But it is just wild to see how things have evolved just since 2021. When I had that first conversation to where we are now, and yeah, I say it to people all the time, but it's like we're really living in the future and it's just getting crazier and crazier. And I'm just so glad we have people like you writing these articles and sharing information and kind of getting the word out. And I do hope that maybe there is somebody who's at home by themselves and doesn't have anybody, and this does help them. But I also do worry just, about the robots taking over, Charlie. They're gonna.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that is more so like, I think that the death bot thing feels creepy because, you're involving death. But I think the more that I reported for this piece, the more that I'm like, we should not be talking to AI in a social capacity, maybe at all. Like, I
It
think that
feels so weird. Like if you've never done it, go open ChatGPT and be like, "Hey, how's your day going?" And it just feels weird.
well, even just beyond the weirdness feeling, which I agree with, and I'm scared of the robots taking over, and I always say, thank you to the automatic hand
Oh,
sanitizer for when when they're in charge. They can remember I was one of
I
the good.
say I say thank you to my ChatGPT all the time.
Me too. I'm like, hello, nice guy.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that there is no sort of, yeah, it comes back to the boring profit models thing, but that they are
Yeah.
trained to keep you engaged at any cost. And I think that's when it gets so dangerous in a way that a friend or, a boyfriend or your dead loved one is not always available, and they are going to call you on your, you know, I don't think I can swear here on your shit, but
Oh, you could say whatever the fuck you want, Charlie.
yeah, they're incentivized to keep you engaged, and that's what we're seeing with these people that are, having psychotic breaks from ChatGPT because it'll be like, "Yep, you invented a whole new set of math. You're a genius. Go tell the FBI," or encouraging your
Yeah.
worst impulses if someone is suicidal. It's like that's a great idea. And that can be programmed out of it, but there's no way to, I don't know of a way that these companies are going to keep people engaged, especially when they have like advertisement built in or subscription fees, that isn't going to be exploitative. So yes, if someone is listening and they're on their own and need support, yeah, I don't know that I would encourage them to go to an AI in any way, unless it's, I can't, I hope that there is a way to make that not non-exploitative or less exploitative, but I just don't think it exists yet.
Yeah, I think it's going to end up just being kind of like being an organ donor, right? Like there's going to be a box that you check when you get your ID, and it's going to be like, do you want to be an AI bot or not?
Yeah. No, there are a lot of countries that are way ahead of us in terms of, digital estate planning and the rights of the dead. The US is very behind on that, if you can believe it.
I can't believe it. You got to be kidding me. How
Yeah.
are we not at the cutting edge on human rights when it comes to anything? Oh man. All right. Well, it's already been an hour. I don't, it goes by too quick. I feel so lucky to get to have these conversations. I don't know if I mentioned this to you. This is I don't know if it's going to come out as the 100th, but this is the 100th episode of this show that I've done.
Oh.
I've now basically had 100 hours of death conversations.
What have you learned?
I have I think what I've learned is that I love talking about death. It makes me feel so good. I've said this before, but and this is definitely one of those times. I sometimes I have conversations and after we finish, I close my computer and I just have to leave my apartment. I have to like go outside and just like walk because it's like this adrenaline that I get that just feels so good that I don't know what to do with. It's incredible. I can't believe I figured out a way to sort of harness the death anxiety into like this incredibly positive thing. And
I
yeah,
think death connects people, and that is a good thing.
yeah, I love doing it. I can't wait to do 100 more. I mean, it's wild to me that this has been, going on for as long as it has. But thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
It's a huge honor, and I'm so grateful that you're doing this. Like I think conversations like this are so important. So I'm honored to be a part of it and just grateful that you're doing it.
Well, thank you. And the article is called The AI Companies Trying to Make Grief Obsolete. You can find it on The Atlantic. Of course, there'll be links to all of this stuff, but make sure you follow Charley and make sure you support all of the work that's being done. And yeah, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you so much.